Well, I was going to ask you in the broader scope of things. Obviously, you talked about NC State, but as the ACC conference as a whole, what do you make of this year of the ACC? Because obviously, it's a down year compared to many other years in the past. And me and Carter have even talked about there's non-Power 5 conferences that we feel probably have a better top 4 or 5 teams in the ACC this year. So what do you make of that?
I agree with you. And it's a credit to you guys as younger folks who are passionate about the ACC, and you're incredibly knowledgeable, I can tell. It's a credit to you. I was listening to a broadcast recently where the play-by-play man said something like it was garbage time, so they were pontificating. Mm-hmm. There's been too much talk about the ACC being down. And then the color commentator chimes in, Duke is really good, and this player's really good, and this coach has had a great year. And, it gets back to what I was saying earlier. Whatever the evidence, if you want to be a cheerleader, like everything's always good and, you're always looking for the glass half full. I love optimistic people. I have no problem with that. But if you're really interested in the truth and whatever it is, you have to be willing to ask those harder questions. And here's the reality, guys. Number one, as a supersized conference, 15 teams rather than the old days, this league has been averaging 8 NCAA tournament bids. It's gotten 7, 9, average 8. It's going to get 4, 5, or 6. That's bad. This league has had regular seasons where 6 teams were ranked in the national top 25. There are 1 this time. Maybe somebody else sneaks in here moving forward.
Carolina's 25 as of today, maybe. I think.
Just today? So 1, maybe 2, okay?
Yeah.
For a league that's used to having 4, 5, and 6. Now, whether you're a glass half full optimist or a glass half empty pessimist, the facts are the facts. And I'll give you one more. The NCAA tournament started seeding its field back in the late 1970s. So we've had more than 40 years where there are 1 seeds, 2 seeds, all the way down to 16, obviously. Prior to that, they did not seed the field. Mm-hmm. Since the NCAA tournament started seeding the field, guess how many years there have been, 40-plus seasons now, where the Atlantic Coast Conference produced only 1 top 4 seed, which is going to be the case this year, obviously.
Oh, gosh.
Over 40-plus years, longer than you guys have been alive. How many times did the ACC fail to generate more than 1 top 4 seed?
I'm going to guess 4.
Answer, 0 until right now. Now, I teach sports media at UNC Wilmington, and I'm always pounding them with lawyer-style logic. If you're at a cocktail party and some fun debate comes up, if you just want to goof around and talk about, hey, the ACC is not as down as some people are saying, you want to play advocate for a league that you like or a coach or a team you like, go right ahead. But if you want to be taken seriously as a journalist, those facts that I just gave you guys, those are sledgehammers. Like the cocktail party debate happens, I bring those 3 things out, and the person
can't argue
on the
that
side of the debate is sucking for oxygen like a fish in the middle of a rowboat, dying to get back in the water. It's over. Like the guys, corner men are throwing the white towel into the ring in forfeit because I just gave you rock solid evidence that this is maybe the worst ACC regular season in almost a half century. Doesn't mean I don't love the ACC. It's just the facts are what the facts are. And maybe they change the narrative with a fun ACC tournament. Maybe they change the narrative by shocking. There have been years where 5 of the Sweet 16 are ACC schools.
Yeah.
So what if somehow, some way that happens? Well, the narrative changes. But as we speak right now, the evidence is crystal clear. There's frankly no intelligent debate whatsoever. And those broadcasters were just frankly being homers. They're afraid to criticize the league that directly or indirectly lines their pockets and pays their paychecks. And, if you're a cheerleader and you just admit being a cheerleader, it doesn't bother me. When people who imply that they're willing to be objective all of a sudden, abandon that because they're afraid to say I'm not going out of my way to say anything negative. I didn't even give you guys an opinion. I just kept spitting facts at you, and that leads to the inevitable conclusion, call it an opinion if you want, that this is one of the most down ACC regular seasons in the last half century, if not number 1 on that list.
2 things. First off, you talk about being outwardly biased. Obviously, I'm going to be outwardly biased towards Duke. It's just human nature. And let's just admit it. Let's admit it.
You guys have Duke and Carolina stuff on, right?
Exactly. And then also, I wrote last night I did an ACC tournament preview for the Tuesday game starting tomorrow. I had Josh Pastner on the podcast. I love him. We talked for about an hour. Awesome guy. Of course, I'm going to pick Georgia Tech to beat Louisville.
Yeah.
Of course I am. Of course I am. But anyhow, second thing I wanted to get to.
You brought that up, Carter, because I can tell you, fans accuse all of us, no matter how objective we are, they accuse us of loving this team, hating that team. I'll tell you from 35 years of experience, I have never cared about a school, but I do find myself rooting for people.
Exactly.
And you're just not human if you don't. Like I've told, there are some schools in this league that have truly paranoid fan bases. And I'm not talking about either of your schools. Truly paranoid.
You'll see me screaming at the TV, yelling at Jay Billis because he's biased.
Lunatic, QAnon-style nut jobs. There are a couple fan bases of that sort. And I've told
Raleigh.
I've told them many times. I might have liked the basketball coach at your school for a long time, and then the coach changed, and I didn't really like that guy, but then it changed again, and I did like that guy. Of course, I'm rooting for good people, good things to happen to good people. And there's only a very small percentage of people I have not liked over 35 years, but I'm not exactly crying myself to sleep when something bad happens to one of those bad people. Mm-hmm. So that's if that's a bias, I'm willing to admit to that. But I have taken extremely seriously my objectivity over 35 years, and I just don't know any other way. Although if I were the play-by-play guy for the Blue Devils or the Tar Heels or whatever, of course your job description changes. Even a podcast host, your job description changes. Just I roll my eyes at those who label themselves as something different than what their words and actions actually show them to be.
Another thing I wanted to touch on, you talked about the ACC being down, probably the worst regular season in ACC history. What makes this even worse is they released this ACC tournament documentary, which is fantastic. It's unbelievable. It's awesome seeing the old footage from the 50s, seeing the old Greensboro Coliseum in the early 70s with those David Thompson teams. But you see that and you're like, wow, the ACC was awesome. Lefty Drizel with Len Bias, Michael Jordan, James Worthy, even those Mike Jaminski, Gene Baines, Duke teams. You see all that. And then you look today and they stink.
It's crazy. I'll tell you this, because I write a lot about money, I've heard it raised, has the ACC, which for most of my time covering it has been the wealthiest conference in America. So if I go back to the late 80s, all the articles I wrote through the 90s, even the early 2000s, the Atlantic Coast Conference, when they would cut that check, of shared revenue, NCAA tournament revenue, TV revenue, bowl revenue, the stuff that you share, that check was larger per school than any of the checks for decades sent out by Big Ten, SEC, Pac-12, Big 12. In the last decade or so, the Atlantic Coast Conference has fallen down that ladder, and there's a big two, Big Ten and SEC. The reason I bring up these money matters is people have wondered, well, if you fall that far behind, the SEC and the Big Ten especially, they created their channels a lot earlier than the ACC network was created. They've also been better in football more frequently, and football pays a lot more bills than men's basketball and any other sport by a lot. So those themes are going against the ACC. So the theory is, could what's happening now, and last year wasn't great either, if you remember. I mean, the top two ACC teams last year were 4 seeds, if I remember correctly, in the NCAA tournament. Could it be that those two leagues just have more money to pay coaches, retain coaches, upgrade their facilities, maximize your recruiting budget, maximize your assistant coaching budget? I don't claim to know the answer to that in the long run. I do point out that the Big 12 has just as many financial problems as the ACC does, and yet they're one of the best conferences in America. The other thing to point out, of course, is one league and only one league has won 6 of the last 12 NCAA titles in men's basketball. So there's 30-some conferences trying really hard. One conference, the Atlantic Coast Conference, current members, 6 of the last 12 were won by current ACC members. That does count Louisville winning one right before the Cardinals joined the ACC. But still, 6 out of 12, man. That's 50% for the rest of the world and 50% for the little old ACC. Carter, your question is particularly poignant in part because of things you guys already know. One Hall of Fame coach, Rick Pitino, who was at Louisville a handful of years ago, is at Iona now. Another head Hall of Fame coach, and I mean guys who are already in the Hall of Fame. I don't mean we'll be there someday. Pitino was in the Hall of Fame and at Louisville a while back. Roy Williams retired from Carolina 1 year ago. Mike Krzyzewski is in the process of retiring as we speak. Jim Boeheim is in the process of retiring probably 1 year from now. That is 4 active Hall of Famers at a time they were together in the league when the ACC was still the number one conference in America. Mm-hmm. Leonard Hamilton at Florida State is over 70 years old. Jim Larinaga at Miami is over 70 years old. I mean, you got the financial issue lingering. You've got head coaching turnover as a significant issue. I still believe it gets back to what Jim Boeheim said a couple weeks ago. Hey, we just need to recruit better players, and then the ACC will be back to what it usually is. But I think those other issues are worth monitoring, because when you have that kind of turnover in Hall of Fame coaches in a relatively short period, I believe in Hubert Davis at Carolina. I believe in John Shire at Duke. We'll see what Syracuse and others do. But Louisville's already been through a coaching change post-Pitino, a couple of them. And those things remain to be seen at those prominent programs. I think the ACC is going to be fine, but it is a question more appropriate to ask right now about the future of ACC basketball than at any time since you guys were throwing out great names from the 1980s. I started with this league in 87. Its greatness certainly predates my arrival. But I don't think there was reason to question the power of the ACC from certainly the early 80s to right now. So that's 40 years where right now is probably the most appropriate time to ask that very valid question. And man, you gave me some, I call it a stroll down amnesia lane, Carter, when you mentioned some of those, Jordan-worthy references from the 80s. Imagine being, I don't know how old you guys are, but when I was roughly, maybe a little younger or roughly, what are you guys? Early 20s?
22. Born in 2000.
Okay. So just picture this. Little DG, like the Connor and Carter age version of me. A lot fewer wrinkles, a lot less gray hair. Late 80s, there is the legendary Dean Smith at Carolina. There was the legendary Mike Krzyzewski, not yet a national champion in the late 80s, but you could tell something was cooking in Durham. And sure enough, a few years later, he goes back to back. There was Terry Holland at UVA. There was a young Bobby Cremens at Georgia Tech. There was the legendary Jim Valvano at the end of his career at NC State. I mean, I was in shock with just the coaches I was covering, the ACC tournaments that I covered starting in, I think, 1989 was the first one. I was mesmerized by the great players and great head coaches in this league. And I still celebrate it all 35 years later, but I'm not sure I could top that lineup of players and coaches, in an era, not only with those great coaches, but before, even the best players would hang around for 3 or 4 years. I don't know if it'll ever be that again, and that's okay. But that's one of the many reasons that I count my blessings, man. I get paid to write and talk about sports for a living, and I believe I've gotten to cover the best conference in America for these last 35 years.